Hi, I'm Ghionis, Nikon Ambassador, portrait, fashion, and wedding photographer, and I'm here in my studio in Las Vegas, and I'm here with professional marketing manager from Epson, Dano Steinhardt. Welcome, mate.
Hey, it's great to be here in Las Vegas inside of a small room with no windows.
I love that. Look, we're here to demystify the process of printing your own work. If you're anything like me, I'm a working professional. I've been doing it for 30 years, but I often send my work out, but often I want to print my own work. And I find it very difficult. I don't know where to start. How do I get my colors right? How do I get my monitor right to actually match the prints that I'm printing on? This is what you're here for. Help us, Dano.
You got it. We'll make it relatively simple, unless you want to get complicated.
No, we'll make it simple, and I'm going to ask questions to Dano and making sure that I'm the voice of the audience here to make sure that we make it simple, keep it clean, and we know how to get a good print by the end of this using some simple techniques.
Excellent.
So Dano, most photographers will use a MacBook Pro or something like that, and why am I not seeing what I get in print? Like, what do I need to know to get what's on my computer screen to be what I see in print?
So we're going to start off with calibrating the monitor. I'm going to go through a little non-scary color stuff. We'll show file formats, a very simple program in order to print. We'll talk a little bit about paper, and we'll make some prints.
Fantastic. You know, for me, you're speaking my language because I want it simpler. I'm the kind of person that doesn't really need to know the science behind it. I just want to know how to do it. So think of it like the car works, it takes me where I want to go. I don't need to know what's in the engine. But certainly for those people who want something more sophisticated, Dano here is an absolute expert with what he does. So if he dumbs it down and I help him dumb it down for you and I to understand it better, just so you know, there's a lot more knowledge in this man's brain, but we'll keep it simple for you and I so that we can get a decent print by the end of the day.
All those years of color science I've studied, you won't let me use it?
Absolutely not. I want to make sure that we have an engaged audience and, like I said, demystify the process of how to get a print. What do I need to look for? What's the common denominators with what I see on my computer? How do I print something? What's the easiest way to get there with software? And certainly I might not take advantage of that fine, nuanced, sophisticated approach to printing, but I just want to get a decent print that I can give to my clients and get to the point also that if I'm printing for competition, I'm getting beautiful dynamic range, I'm getting depth in my shadows and my highlights, I'm getting beautiful color, and perhaps talk even about paper choices just to a certain degree to get an understanding of what to look for when we get to that process. So let's dive right in. Give me an idea of where do I begin? I've got a computer, I've got a MacBook Pro, which most photographers have. I've got an Epson printer. In this case, we're using an SCP 900. So it's a 17 by 22 inch printer. And now what do I do? Where do I begin?
So a lot of people want to go straight to the printer and they want to start doing things and they want to know, as the Epson guys, there's some special tool. I go in there, that's how you get those prints.
So ignore the printer, it's a tool, right? Okay.
It's a tool that receives the file that you send it, and the most important thing is managing that file properly.
Okay.
So let's do it in a simple, easy way.
Perfect.
And the way to get started is to calibrate your monitor. Many people that start out printing will say, gee, my prints are too dark. The prints aren't too dark, your monitor may be too bright.
Right.
And there's a very simple way of doing that.
Okay.
There's some monitors will self-calibrate. And for other monitors, you want to use something that's called a colorimeter, fancy word, better known as the puck.
Right.
There's different manufacturers out there.
Yeah.
I just happen to have one here. There is a sensor on one side, and some of them will also measure ambient light. And you simply plug this into your computer, and it'll run some software. The software looks very complicated at first, but really there's only a few key things you really have to know. You want to select the type of monitor you have, and most importantly, you want to set the brightness. The brightness on monitors is measured in candelas per meter squared. And I believe that comes from your people's invention of...
Greek, yes, thank you very much. You're welcome.
Right. I don't know about the meter squared business. But some people just colloquially call them candelas.
Right.
In television manufacture, they'll call it nits. It's just the unit of luminance, or as what we know as brightness.
Right.
Many monitors are very bright when they come out of the box. They look great. But for printing, you want to be at 100 to 120 candelas per meter squared. It'll also say CD with the square root of 2, or not square root of 2, power of 2.
Right.
I went to art school. Sometimes it'll say nits.
Right.
There are other settings there. You'll see something called gamma. Today, everyone uses 2.2. And then there's another
what
setting.
does that mean? What does 2.2 mean?
Gamma is a measure of contrast,
Right.
not to be confused with gamut,
Right.
which is a measurement of color and how wide color is. If you're of a certain age, I've referenced this many times, when I used to have hair, we used to use densitometers,
Right.
and used to use like Kodak Super Double X, and it was really flat, and you had to increase the gamma. You'd be in the 1.8 to 2.2. These are the numbers there. You'll see these sometimes in printing too. And what are these numbers? Now they're just changing them. But 2.2 is the gamma that should be used for most monitors. In the past, there were Windows people would say it's this, and Mac people would say it's this. 2.2 is fine. And then there's a selection for color balance, and it's not Kelvin, but it's similar to Kelvin, and that'll be either D50 or D65. Many people use D65, but I know for competition with WPPI, I believe the light boxes are D50. And if you're doing competition printing and you want to get that color as best as possible for that particular light box, select D50 or whatever the spec is.
So can I ask a question? Now, let's say I didn't have the hockey puck, so to speak. I didn't have that particular device. There is a setting within the Mac system where you can actually go in there and choose D50 or D65, and it sort of dulls down the screen a little bit. If I had no other choice, I didn't have a separate monitor, I didn't have that device, would that be as close as I would get to understanding what my file looks like and what it'll be in print?
Yes.
I'm after the band. I'm after the, like, is that the easiest way? I mean, is that the closest way that I could get to it?
Our recommendation for printing is if you are taking the time and the expense of doing the printing, we would highly recommend the puck or the colorimeter, which is a relatively inexpensive item.
Right.
I would say almost a necessity in order to make prints that are not going to surprise you, or you're not going to be chasing things. And my experience has been with the colorimeters, the pucks, you will save time and you will save money with them.
Right.
And that would be the...
So if you're going to do it, just go ahead and do it.
But if you're in a jam and you broke your colorimeter and you're in a foreign country somewhere and you don't know what to do...
That's what I wanted to know.
What you just described is going to affect color, but it doesn't affect brightness.
Right.
And here is the unofficial... Dano did it in a jam. What should the brightness be on this particular MacBook Pro? It could vary. The brightness level, I would click down 4.
Okay.
Got me out of a jam.
That's what I was looking for. I was looking after the simple.
It is not an official recommendation.
No, down 4, but would you put your settings in your computer at D50 or D65?
Depends. Well, D65 is kind of the ubiquitous what you should use out there.
Right.
So if you're doing something specific, say like the icon of words, which is using a GTI lightbox that is set for D50, then absolutely set that.
Okay, fantastic. And let's show you guys how we actually get to that particular setting. So Dano, it all starts with calibrating your monitor, really understanding what you're seeing on the screen is what you're going to get in print, but there has to be a standard. So there's a few ways of doing it. Now, on some Mac operating systems, you can go into displays, and then you can go to preset, and then you can choose, you've got a preset that's P350 or P365. Tell us briefly what that means.
P3 references a color space. It's three-dimensional. We'll show a little bit of that later. It's not too scary.
Sure.
Kind of designed really for the motion picture video world.
Right.
Similar to Adobe RGB.
Okay.
50 and 65 are D50 and D65, which a lot of people say is Kelvin, and 5,000 Kelvin, 6,500 Kelvin.
Talking color temperature now.
Yes. It's actually not truly Kelvin for all the geeks out there, but pretty close.
Okay, I understand. So now, just so you know, if you put those settings on your computer, if your operating system actually has that feature, you will not be able to adjust the brightness. It will actually dull the screen down a little bit to sort of emulate roughly what a print would be. Now, don't forget that your screen is going to be glossy. It's backlit illuminated. You're not talking about light illuminating a physical print, and that's obviously a long story to explain that properly. But let's say you wanted to do it an intermediate way. Okay, so we're not doing it the bare bones Band-Aid solution that I just mentioned. We've got a colorimeter, and tell us what that is and what it does, and the one that you recommend, or at least the one that you're using today.
The colorimeter, better known as the puck.
Yep.
This one is from Calibrate. They have different models. This one is the Display Pro HL. I believe that it allows us to work in both video as well as still.
Right.
Colorimeter just means it's measuring red, green, and blue.
Right.
Sounds dangerous. It's very simple.
Fantastic.
And this colorimeter has a sensor that you place on the monitor. You'll run software, and various color patches will go red and green and all sorts of colors. It's measuring that to understand what the monitor is doing, and then it will create a profile based on those measurements in the software. And this slides over the top, and it's used to measure ambient light. Good rule of thumb is, don't be in a room that's too bright, don't be in a room that's too dark. Normal, average light, you don't want to be near windows. And you also, in your immediate surrounding, you don't want a lot of fancy colors. A really good pro tip is use a gray background on your monitor.
Right.
Don't use fancy colors and things, because our brain will get confused. And if you have some very colorful, something that's really blue in the background, and you're working on images, you could all of a sudden be overcorrecting for that, and your prints are going to come out yellow.
Right. Perfect. Great tip. All right. Well, let's get into the, not so much the science behind it, but let's get into the process of how we calibrate our monitor.
So this particular software from Calibrate, there's a couple of screens. And you would choose if you're working in projection or if you're using a monitor, and then the device. This one is this one here, the Calibrate Display Pro. Select this, and you hit Next. And then you would select if you're working in pre-press, if you're still making magazines, CMYK, all that old world, but we're doing about photo. So then make sure that we're clicked on photo, and then here are the key things that we were talking about. The default is D65. D50 is also available, and if you're doing prints for competition like the Icon Awards, they're using a GTI light box that I believe is D50, then you can change this to simulate D50, which is going to be slightly warmer.
Right.
The default that I have set here is correct at 120, and there's that fancy Greek stuff. CD over M squared. What does that mean? Candelas per meter squared. Candelas, nits. Just look for 100 to 120,
Right.
and you'll be good.
We don't need to know what that means. Just put it on that.
I spent years understanding that.
Don't care.
And then gamma 2.2.
Right.
That is contrast. Many years ago, this used to be much more complicated, depending on your OS and systems and all sorts of things. 2.2 and you're fine. There's all sorts of other things you can do. That's all you really need in order to make prints.
Can I ask you something, Dano? Like, is that been defaulted to those settings? Or like if you want to change one of these, are you clicking on it? Are you pressing something else? Or that's the default with what you're looking at right now?
This is set up because that default works for many people when you're in a photo background based on the monitor we've chosen.
Okay, fantastic.
All right, so once you've set those basic settings, you click Start. The instructions will tell you to place the colorimeter on the monitor on this target. It's a big target, you can't miss. Click Next.
So what's it doing now? What would I expect that this product is doing?
So the first thing it's doing is it's asking if your adjustment for your brightness is in that range. And it's showing our targeted white luminance is 120, and the measured white luminance is a little low. And that's because I was using the unauthorized Dano 4 clicks down. So I'm going to make it a little brighter, and there. It's very close. It's right on at 120.
Right.
So I might have to change my recommendation to 3 clicks down.
There you go. No worries.
But it'll depend on your ambient light.
Sure. Obviously, for the sake of the video production right now, we have some ambient light illuminating us so you can basically see us talking. And certainly, I mean, we're doing this on a MacBook Pro, but you would recommend to do this on a screen that is calibratable, shall we say, at something like an ISO or a BenQ or something like that becomes the industry standard that you would do this on. But right now we're doing it on a MacBook Pro, but you're saying that this may not be the ideal way.
It's easier to do it on that type of screen,
Right.
Because they don't articulate and they don't bend, and you're not moving around as much because density can change. You can certainly calibrate a screen on any notebook or MacBook. You just want to be cognizant of where your head is and the angle of your screen.
Yeah. And also, something to note as well is that a lot of the screens that we use for day-to-day usage, whether it's email or video or streaming, whatever it may be, it's very glossy. And you'll obviously notice that a lot of the screens that are separate that you want to calibrate on have this sort of dullness to it. They don't have that glossy finish. Tell us a bit more about that and why.
That's so that you can move around and not get an ambient, an instant reflection off to something behind you or off to the side. That could be distracting. And better simulates how a print's going to look.
Yeah, because of course a print is not glossy. I mean, you can get a glossy print per se, but traditionally, like your inkjet prints and things like that we're used to seeing, especially for like the Icon Awards or anything like that, are going to be a little bit flatter. So the minute you're seeing a backlit screen compared to a front-lit illuminated paper, then there's obviously a bit of a disparity there. So we have to emulate it as best as possible.
You can certainly use a glossy screen, but a matte screen is better because it's the old photographer's trick. Anything glossy makes colors pop a little more, makes blacks a little richer. And if you're working with matte fine art papers and you're always in a glossy environment, you could have that, why is this feeling a little dull? Well, the print's not dull. Your monitor is a little too glossy.
Too glossy and too bright. Yeah.
And now next, and the software is going to produce various colors and various neutral patterns. And it's going to measure all of them to determine what the monitor is doing and then create a profile. And then that profile is there to say, oh, we know this particular monitor, its red is a little too far out there. The profile helps bring it back. This blue is a little this, or this neutral tone, this tonality is there. We used to always call this, Scotty's matter antimatter thing, because ideally you want something that is straight up the middle, but everything's off a little bit, so you want to balance it.
Can I ask a stupid question? Well, now it's recognizing what the monitor is and adjusting accordingly, but are you adjusting the monitor globally when I'm not in this program, or do I have to activate a program to see the adjustments that it's actually making?
So once the profile is created, the computer will apply that profile globally to what you're doing.
Right.
So some people, they create a monitor profile for when they're printing. Then they'll use that same monitor for video production, or they'll use that same monitor for gaming, and you should then select a different profile if you want accuracy in those different types of applications.
So I guess in layman's terms, like, would you liken it to getting a TV and like you getting a TV and actually putting it on cinema quality or gaming or anything like that? Because you'll find that the brightness, the richness, the contrast will change. So you really, that's a layman's way of basically saying what
essentially those are profiles.
Right. Yeah.
With a fancier name.
Yes.
So at this point, it tells us to remove the device. I thought it was the puck. I guess we have to call it the device.
No, I'm a mad hockey fan, so let's call it a puck.
Okay.
It just rhymes with something. So
it says replace the diffuser so you don't damage that sensor. So we'll do that.
Perfect.
And then if you just love that process or something happened, or while you were calibrating, someone opened a window and you could remeasure on the left, or you can just hit next.
Right. Now, what am I looking at now?
I believe you would have to ask the Calibrate sales manager, but I believe those are all of the colors that were measured and what's part of the profile. Now with this particular software, if you want to get reminded every week, every month, it's time to recalibrate because monitors do drift. You would have to be connected to the internet. We're not right now, but then we would just hit save, and that's the name of the profile and the date that we've done this.
It's clever that it's dated so that you basically know it's it's not at its best. You know what I mean? We've passed the use by date, so to speak.
So now we've created the profile, and it's saved, and we're done.
So now what? What do we do now? So now I've got a color profile. What do I do now?
Well, now we close the software, and we can print.
I can't wait. Let's do it.
So this is one of your images, and you shot in RAW.
That's right.
And this is not a Photoshop thing. We're not going to go into all the settings on the right side.
Sure.
But I did want to point out, because sometimes it's easy to miss if you're in Adobe Camera Raw, the way you bring a raw file into a color space is down here. It's kind of small, and you click here, and you'll get this screen. And this is the color space and the bit depth. We just recommend using the default to the sensor that you're using. And when you click on color space, you're going to see all these things here, but it's actually all the color spaces are above this line.
Yeah, can you describe for a layperson what a color space is? As simple as that may be.
A color space is a way to define in 3 dimensions how much color you have to work with.
Right.
For inkjet printing in particular, you want to bring the file into, some would say, the widest color space possible. Because there are colors that you can print with most inkjet printers that are larger than even Adobe RGB.
Right.
The main message here is, especially for printing, do not work in sRGB. sRGB is a color space that is smaller. So think of it like a baseball. Think of Adobe RGB, kind of like a grapefruit. And then there's this other one called ProPhoto RGB. And I guess the best way to put it, especially from your native land, it'd be like a durian, big thing, you know? And we'll show what that actually looks like.
Right.
But you want to be, because if you bring your file into a smaller color space, you have essentially clipped colors that you can reproduce. Now, those colors don't go away, but they won't be as saturated.
Can I ask you another question? So when I'm photographing, does it make a difference if I'm actually photographing on sRGB, on Adobe RGB in the file, regardless of whether it's raw or not?
So one of the misnomers is that people say, oh, of course I want to be in Adobe RGB instead of sRGB.
Right.
That's really only telling you what the LCD display
The
is.
embedded JPEG, the proxy, what you're looking at.
It's a proxy.
Right.
When you shoot RAW, in the case of Nikon electronic format file,
Right.
NEF,
Yeah.
there is no color space.
Right.
You have to define, you have to tell it what to bring it into.
Right.
So yes, it's always good to be in Adobe RGB for
On your camera.
on your camera, for your JPEGs, unless you're in applications where you're only going to use those on the web, because the web is sRGB.
Right.
So websites, social media, those are definitely sRGB. And if that's all you're going to do, then set sRGB.
Great. But if you're photographing for the printed product as your end game, then go Adobe RGB 100%.
Well, you want to make sure you're shooting in RAW.
Right.
And then depending on your application, especially portraits, people, the kind of things that you do, Adobe RGB 1998, which is the full name, that's an hour discussion on that one, is probably going to be fine.
Right.
There are commercial applications where you want as wide a gamut as possible, and there is another color space, and that's ProPhoto RGB. With ProPhoto RGB, you absolutely have to be in 16-bit. With Adobe RGB, you can be in 8-bit or 16-bit. We recommend 16-bit because that gives you space in which to edit and to do things.
Right.
So in this case, we're going to bring it into Adobe RGB, and there it is, 1998. Right. That's because that's when they came up with it. Right. And it's a long story about where it came from. It originally was a SMPTE space thing.
I don't care.
Okay. You won't let me do the good stuff. So here we're going to select Adobe RGB 1998.
Okay.
And you can select either 16-bit or 8-bit. Some cameras will tell you they have 14 bits. Again, that's not pertaining to the RAW file.
And in layman's terms, what we're saying basically is the 16-bit has more detail.
That's 16-bit allows greater depth of information and detail.
Sure.
So you want to work that, especially if you're going to do any cropping, any retouching, anything else. You want to work bigger, and then you can always get down smaller. But if you're smaller, you can't go bigger.
Sure.
Or you can, you're just introducing errors and artifacting.
Yeah.
So that's the key thing when you're working with a RAW file is, in the case of many of the work that you do and many people watching this, Adobe RGB 1998, 16-bit. Mm-hmm. For those that are doing really wide gamut commercial work and they're looking for absolutely every color there is, you would choose ProPhoto RGB. But I think you're going to be fine here in Adobe RGB 1998.
Perfect.
Leave that at default, click OK, and then work on your file.
Okay.
That's how you bring a RAW file into a color space.
Okay. So that's the first step. So now we're going to do what we do in the Camera Raw adjustments. So we're getting like the base foundation right, and then we'll bring it in Photoshop and then retouch and do what we do and all that kind of stuff. Is that correct?
Yes, but before that,
Yep.
I'm going to give you the color science, really basic, kind of interesting. I think it's interesting. You could let me know later.
No, let's do it.
Okay. Okay. A little bit of color science. Here's your image.
Okay.
And we know that it's an Adobe RGB 1998. But what does that mean? So let's bring up a program that allows us to see how color works in 3 dimensions.
Now, is this a program that I need, or you're just displaying your point?
Would you like it? I would say for most photographers, no.
You don't need
But it's brilliant software. It's called ColorThink.
Okay.
And it's a way of plotting color. And here's just a little bit, because some people have seen this. And it's called the YXY. Some people call it the horseshoe. And they go, oh, ha, I know that.
Okay.
And they've seen, oh, a color space is that triangle within that. I won't go into all the details, but essentially for the work that we do, it's kind of irrelevant because of how it was set up, and it was never designed for photography because color is 3-dimensional. So if someone says, yeah, I use this color space because of this horseshoe diagram, say, aha, we should be looking at things 3-dimensionally in something called LAB. It's 3-dimensional. So scientists came together 1976. I know this because it's called LAB 1976. And they wanted to characterize color in 3 dimensions the way that we actually see it. And this is L, and it's this vertical axis. And that stands for lightness. A lot of people, oh, that's luminosity. No, it's called lightness. Don't worry about it. It's basically 0 is here, black, and 100 is white at the top. And then there are 2 vectors for color, the A and B, and we can look at these things in 3 dimensions. So the brighter a file is, higher up in the scale. The more saturated a color is, the further out it goes. And that's the easiest way to characterize it. So I think, so we're in LAB, and it's 3-dimensional. And we can move this grid around, and I can actually put it into motion and make people feel really queasy. But let's look at one of your images here to demonstrate color space. And this is an image that does not have a lot of saturated color. And let's see how that image would plot in 3 dimensions. So that we know that it is less saturated.
So are you bringing the image in?
Yep.
How is it referencing it?
This is the actual image as it plots in 3-dimensional space. But what's interesting about it is that we know it's not terribly saturated. Let me put it right there. There. Because we see how it's just moving in this direction. We know what our white point is, and those are going to be the shadow areas, and the shadow areas are less saturated than these areas, which are, going into that kind of warmer tone. Let's see if we can bring it up here in the trousers here and those colors, and that's what's plotting over there. And that's great. So let me show you what this would look like if you brought that into the sRGB space. 2 to 3 hours to explain why it's this shape? Just take my word for it. This is sRGB. And it has this kind of shape. And then I can reduce the opacity of that so that we can see how that less saturated image plots. And you'll see that almost all of that image fits within sRGB.
Right.
So the point is that a lower saturated image that has less gamut volume, because we're dealing in 3-dimension, yeah, this would work in sRGB. So someone would say, well, why don't I just shoot in sRGB? It's so much easier, and that's the way the web is.
In layman's terms, if those dots were surpassing that area, then we have a problem.
Yes. So let's turn off sRGB. We know this particular image. Let it spin around there. That's how it's doing. See, I could look at that for hours.
Me, at least 10 seconds.
Yeah. But let's close that and go to this more colorful image, more saturated image. We're going to turn that off. And now that's how this other image plots. And you can start to see that it's moving further out on that A and B axis.
Right.
And it's because it's much more colorful, and especially out in these reds. And why is that? It's the lips.
Right.
So it's important to take a look at those lips, because if you were to be in sRGB, because it might be, oh, everything's in sRGB, it's not a problem, and we put sRGB over the top of that.
Oh, we're on the fringe of it. Okay, so...
And you might say, well, geez, I'm fine, you know, that's well in there. But look around here. Surprisingly, look at these blues.
I mean, what's a few dots between friends?
By using sRGB,
Right.
Even though you might have friends, you have now clipped those colors. These are colors that are captured in your file, in your calibrated monitor, that you know you want, that you know you can get on your paper, that you can't,
right,
because you have physically clipped them. Now, what happens is when you do print those out of gamut colors, that's where the term comes from.
Right.
It's not like all of a sudden when you get a print, it's black, it's missing the color.
Sure.
It remaps it to the edge of that color space, and the colors get darker and desaturated. Or, as we know in inkjet printing, ugh.
So that was a long way of basically, it's a very sexy way of showing it, but basically it was a long way of saying that we should shoot in Adobe RGB, but if we're shooting RAW, it doesn't really matter. It's when we're bringing it into the software, the color space that we should basically choose is Adobe RGB, because we're getting a broader color range, similar to dynamic range in terms of density and detail, but a color version of that.
Yep.
And what you've just done is proven that.
And here is Adobe RGB.
Yeah.
Ah,
there we go. Okay.
And you see how much smaller, and it's not in all colors.
Yeah.
You can see down here in the yellows and things like that. And it's important to look at it three-dimensionally, because it's going to change. But look at the changes in green.
Yeah.
And if I turn off sRGB.
So we've got everything in there.
And it is.
Yeah. I understand.
And it's all in gamut.
Yeah. So now we're giving our file every chance. What we see and then what we see in print is going to be the closest thing we can get.
So please, at a minimum, bring your raw files into Adobe RGB 1998. And for some people who want extreme color, photographing neon signs, other types of things, you may want to be in an even wider color space called ProPhoto RGB.
Right. I love that. That was actually almost interesting to me. So Dano, we've talked a bit about color science and of course calibrating your monitor first. Well, now what? What do we do now?
So before we print, let's talk a little bit about paper.
Okay.
The beauty about inkjet printing is you have all this amazing choice of papers. The agony of inkjet printing is you have all these amazing papers.
I thought you were going to say that. Yeah.
There are hundreds of them out there.
Right.
But I like to take people through a very basic kind of decision tree. And it starts first with, do you like photographs that are traditional photographic, rich color, deep black, D-Max, or do you like a more subtle, painterly, illustrative look?
Right.
No right or wrong answers.
Sure.
After you've made that kind of decision on that tree, do you then like a paper that is smooth or textured or heavily textured, such as canvas?
Right.
Okay. Then, especially if you're doing works that are going to be collected, you're producing works for clients where they're going to hang for decades in people's homes, you want to be cognizant of something called an OBA. An OBA stands for optical brightening agent. An OBA will make any print look better. But OBAs excite in the presence of ultraviolet, but they will dissipate over time. The general consensus is for collectability, for important memories, you want to use papers that don't have OBAs. With that said, the majority of the most famous Ansel Adams prints have OBAs. But it's a little bit of inkjet's held to a higher standard. So just be cognizant of that. There are prints with and without OBAs.
How do you recognize that?
It'll be in the specifications.
Okay.
Sometimes it's in the naming of the papers. Just check the specifications.
Sounds great. So I can't wait to get into printing. So what next? What do we do now?
Tell me what kind of paper, the type of style you're looking for in a paper.
Your Platine paper I really love. It's substantial. It's got a certain density to it. It's got beautiful blacks, and it really renders tones really well and great for competition. So I'm biased to that. And perhaps we try some other papers as well, but that's probably my favorite that I'd like to test.
Legacy Platine utilizes the photo black ink. So you're going to get the deepest blacks, DMAX, greatest color saturation.
Yeah.
So we'll take this image. And if you're in Photoshop, just go File, Automate, to Epson Print Layout.
And while that's cooking up, so obviously we're assuming that you've retouched the image, you're using the exact file that you want to print from, you've opened up it in Photoshop, and now we're going to the Epson utility and the print layout. So tell us a bit more about the settings here and what we should look out for. Things that we need to know and things that we don't need to know.
Epson Print Layout was designed to make the interface easier. Previous to this, you could print straight out of Photoshop and go into the driver, but you have to do settings in Photoshop, then you have to do settings in the driver, then you have to go back to the Photoshop, and there were opportunities to make mistakes.
Right.
So Epson Print Layout was designed to make it one page, very simple, and similar to how Adobe Camera Raw works, always work top down.
Okay.
Also, Epson Print Layout is free and it's included in the driver.
Fantastic.
So again, working top down. The image has been imported into Epson Print Layout. And in Epson Print Layout, you can customize this a little bit. You can make this bigger or smaller. It'll bring a thumbnail in or no thumbnail if you don't want it. And you can move this panel in and out. Sometimes, at the first time, these might be closed. And there's been many a trade show go, oh, I didn't see anything. Yeah, you just have to, open these up. And those are the key panels to print.
Fantastic.
So working top down, so we're printing with the P900. For those that know, want to know, SC stands for Sure Color.
Right.
Everyone calls it the P900.
Right.
And this is where you would click to select the media. And as mentioned, we're going to be printing with Legacy Platine. We're using 17 by 22, but these are the places where you can put in the size you want. You can also create a custom paper size depending on what you're doing. We're going to be printing on sheets, but with the P900, there is a front loading thing for very, very thick papers.
Right.
We don't have to worry about it in this case. And also with the P900, there's an accessory you can buy so you can do rolls.
Right.
It doesn't have a built-in cutter like some more expensive professional machines that we have, like the new 5370. But in this case, we're going to be going with sheet.
So you can go 17-inch wide, and it can be as long as you basically want.
Almost as long, except for the purists out there that will say, well, with Photoshop, after 100 whatever it inches,
right.
And then you need a third-party rip in order to bypass it. For the majority of stuff, you're going to be fine.
Perfect.
Click sheet. Now, under quality settings, this has been simplified from all the confusing DPI 2480, 2880 by 20 or whatever, to, with this paper, high quality, max quality carbon black. Don't be tempted to use this unless you're using a very glossy paper. Right. This was designed for people who remember Cibachrome prints, and they wanted that ultra glossy deep black on glossy papers.
Right.
You can use it on Platine. It'll double your print time, and there's no advantage. Max quality. Type. Standard, or if we're doing panoramas, gallograms, templates, you can do that with Epson Print Layout. That's all it is. Portrait means it's vertical. Landscape means it's horizontal.
Perfect.
Leave that. Scale to fit, if you just want the thing to be as big as possible, well, your image, as big as possible, you would click this, and it's going to crop it in and just maximize a bit. For most cases, you don't want to do that. So one of the things I love about Epson Print Layout, there's another one a little further down, is moving the image and placing the image where you want it on the page. You can certainly do this in other programs, but it's harder, it's complicated. So if you want the image centered, and you just like to, you don't know how big your borders, how big you want them to be, all you have to do is just grab a corner. And because it's centered, it'll be absolutely centered. So if you want to have an image like that, if you're making a fine art statement, or bigger, or however you want it. You can also, if you have, my image area has to be very specific because it's a competition, or it's going to fit in this mat, or it has to fit in this frame, you can literally just type that in, whatever it has to be. And this will compensate for it in the aspect ratio.
That's fantastic, yeah.
But I kind of like to do it visually, if at all possible. But sometimes photographers will say, gee, I want to leave less space at the top and more space at the bottom in order to sign. So you can come over here and click on horizontal. And now I can move the image up and down, but I can't move it left and right. I'm trying to move it. It's not going. That way I know my left and right margins are always going to be centered, and then I can move this.
Something so simple but very thoughtful.
Yep.
That's great.
So let's just go back to center. And let's just put this in at 12 inches. That's how it's going to print. If you want to put in a margin color, you would click here. Maybe you want all black. You can go to a little color picker here. Maybe you're not having the best day judgment-wise, and you choose something like this. You could do that.
That's not too bad.
But let's turn that off. And you just want to make sure this is checked so that you're not cropping. You're not using Epson Print Layout as an editing tool.
Right.
You're better off doing those things before it gets in Epson Print Layout.
Perfect.
And I think we're going to be stuck with that lovely color there, but at least it's not on. We don't have to worry about it. Here's the next best thing about Epson Print Layout, which is great for me, is color management. If you're in Photoshop, Lightroom, and setting profiles, and they go here, and blah, 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 it's like double color management in the old days. You can even get it today. You can have some issues. If you have set your printer and the paper here, and you select Use ICC Profile, this will automatically put in the correct profile for printing. If you're a person that says, well, I drive a manual and I refuse to use automatic transmission, and you want to go in here and you want to go find the profiles, and if you have a couple of printers on here and it's like late at night and boy, this can get, don't do that. It's better. Go with the auto. And on rendering intent, this is one of the last vestiges, a little bit of color management, kind of weird. What does that mean? It's basically saying if there are any out of gamut colors, which we talked about, and if you have calibrated your monitor, instead of the old soft proofing technique, which is kind of complicated in Photoshop, you can determine which of the two rendering intents are best by just looking at the image and toggling between perceptual and relative colorimetric. And if you may not see a difference, but if you see a difference...
Yeah, one looks a bit flatter and one's got a bit more contrast to it, like that one. I think I prefer that one.
That is the correct answer, the one you prefer.
Yeah.
Some people will say, well, if you're using a blue sky, make sure you're using relative colorimetric. Oh, if there's a dog wearing a red vest chasing a green ball, you should be using... Just calibrate your monitor and just choose.
Don't overthink it, feel it, and then choose accordingly. I love it.
And then just make sure black point compensation is checked. That could be an hour discussion in color science. Why? Just leave it checked and all will be good. And then simply hit print.
Ooh, can I do that?
Already did.
Wow, look at that detail. It's so good.
So, how about printing a black and white image?
I'd love to. Yeah, this is one of my recent favorite shots, so I'd like to see how it prints. We've got nice little subtle highlights there, beautiful detail. We've got nice deep blacks. Yeah, I want to see how it prints. So, okay. Do we do anything differently?
No. It's so easy. We just go through the same process.
Now, if I want to maximize this photograph, though, on a 17 by 22 inch print, will I have to actually flip it vertical?
The nice thing about working with Epson Print Layout, you don't have to worry about that.
Okay.
So just go to File, Automate, Epson Print Layout. You can also, if you have the file already done, you can drag it into Epson Print Layout.
So although you're viewing it horizontally, it'll print vertically.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'd say don't worry about it. Otherwise you would get confused.
Sure. I mean, traditionally I'm used to actually formatting my print vertically, even though it's a horizontal image. But I love the fact that this particular software is actually showing it the way it reads correctly, rather than always having to flip it and then printing it out. It's a more thoughtful approach.
So like the color image before, just working top down. We're here with the printer. Do you want to print on this paper or a different paper? Or what do you like about this image?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I think the Legacy Platine would be perfect for this image, but maybe we try something else that you might recommend, just so we can get a comparative. What do you feel?
Great. So we have some Legacy etching here.
Okay.
So thinking in terms of that decision tree, the photo black ink with that traditional photographic gutsy D-Max in color, more fine art, matte, painterly effect. That would be a cotton fiber paper. Platine's cotton fiber too. But this is going to be matte. But maybe we want just a little subtle amount of texture.
Okay.
And that's what Legacy etching is.
Okay. Fantastic.
There's Legacy textured, if you like textured.
Right.
And there's Legacy fiber, if you like dead smooth. But let's see what a little texture looks like.
Sure.
So we would just go here and select Legacy etching. See the change there? Because, yep. All right. So again, we're 17 by 22. We're doing sheets, quality. Oh, gee, there's only 2 settings here. Why is that? That's because we're working with a fine art matte paper. So there's going to be dot gain. So max quality doesn't do anything because you're just building up dots and nothing happens. So if you're working on this and go, whoa, where's my third one? Where's carbon black? Where's all those other things? It's not applicable to a fine art paper, matte fine art paper. So let's select max quality. Everything's the same here. It's standard. We're going landscape. We don't want to scale to fit. We'll leave it centered. Mm-hmm. Let's keep the image size. We were at, was it 12 inches before? Let's keep it at 12 inches.
So this is a 2:3 ratio. The cool thing is that although the canvas size of this print is 17 by 22, the size there exactly relates to what the size of the image will be.
Yep.
Yep.
What do you think? Should we give this one a try now?
I don't know. You know what? It freaks me out a little bit, even though that I'm not seeing it. Can you just get rid of that? Because it just, my OCDness is being challenged.
I think we have to select it
to
bring that up.
All right.
And then let's put this at... It
took you a long time to think of 0.
You're going to edit that? That's for black. I was just wanting to educate you. That's all. 255. This is just basic RGB color theory. There we go.
Look at you.
Okay, but what's different about working in black and white? You can print with the ICC profile. And if you're in a, your monitor's calibrated, you can use the ICC profile, you're going to get a very good black and white image. But there is something called the advanced black and white mode right there.
Oh, now you've gotten fancy.
Now, this has been available in the Epson driver for years, but you could never look at your actual image. It was always a proxy image. And just moving down, there are some presets of neutral, but these are massive. Cool is cold. Warm is warm. Sepia is, well, there's some jokes about that. I'll tell you after the taping. So I'd go here to find adjustment. And the nice thing about Epson Print Layout is you can do toning. But before we get to there, it's always a little joke here. These are gamma settings from the old black and white darkroom days. I think this is 1.6, 1.8, 2.0, etc. And a decision was made by others, engineers, not to put in those gamma settings, but to put these names in. The default is often darker. Ooh, I don't want that. But through testing, I have found that dark is normal, and normal is too light. So just a little hint, go with dark.
I don't really care how we got there, but if that's your recommendation based upon experience,
select dark.
We're good.
Now let's say you want to tone this, and you grab this little arrow here, and let's say you want to go into that sepia direction. Well, sepia is kind of like all the way at the end, but you see, because if your monitor's calibrated,
it's quite
you're
beautiful.
going to see exactly how that's going to look.
Yeah.
But I always found sepia toning, if you ever did it in the darkroom, it was like boom, and then all the smell, and then you got what you got. Maybe you don't want it as severe, and you can move this back. Or you like cyanotypes, but you never liked that harsh, hard blue. Maybe you wanted something more subtle. And this allows you to move around and to tone however you like to tone. And then if you do find something you like, just make note of what your horizontal and vertical axis so you can always get back to it.
That's cool.
So let's just put this at 0. And that's neutral black and white. Again, you can do this through an ICC profile, but there's 2 things. There's a possibility you might get a little color tinging depending on the profile. And there's another big advantage of the advanced black and white mode. Because it's not using all the colors, specifically yellow, the light fastness of these prints will dramatically increase.
Right.
With the papers that we're going to be using here and the ink set in this printer, prints are expected to not show any noticeable fading for up to 200 years. Through the advanced black and white mode, up to 400 years.
I mean, how do you test that?
This is done by there's a very old man in the Midwest.
Oh, that's a classic.
We look to independent third parties like Henry Wilhelm of Wilhelm Imaging Research,
Right.
who runs accelerated print tests. So they'll blast light to simulate, simulate 200 years, 300 years, 400 years.
Right.
And some people would say, come on, 50 years, we're all gone, does it matter? In the collectible world, it matters because it has provenance and it means the print can be passed along to generations. And that's also true family portraits, weddings. In many ways, people are going to be looking at these prints hundreds of years from now. They may have difficulty finding the file to reprint it. They may, we always joke, did you ever use a zip drive or a jazz drive? How are those looking to you right now? The print,
Yeah, once it's in print, it's there forever.
So the whole 200 years, 400 years, does it matter?
Yeah.
It adds to the value in the collectible world. It adds to a feeling of doing the right thing in the personal world.
Yeah.
Now these are for converting color to black and white. I wouldn't recommend it. I think you're better off doing any conversions you're doing in other programs.
Right. So if we were to print this and we wanted some more contrast, we wanted just something, we don't want just something finer detail. Do we do it in here or
you could.
Are we going back?
If it's a subtle little thing, sure, you could add a little more contrast here. But if it's significant, I think you're much better off doing it in another program managing the file.
Okay.
But I think you'll find if you're working with calibrated monitors,
right,
the black and white prints are amazing in advanced black and white mode.
So once again, we're on a MacBook Pro at the moment. I certainly have a separate monitor over here as well. I have an ISO monitor that self-calibrates. So it really depends on what you've got, what your budget is, but the absolute minimum, we're saying if you are using a MacBook Pro, then at least get that puck on there, calibrate it, and then at least you're getting as close to as humanly possible with the equipment that you have. If you want to go that extra extent, then get yourself a separate monitor, and now we're getting to that particular point as well.
And then if you wanted to make 10 copies, you can plug that in there.
Okay, that's
cool. Well, let's go with one.
Yep.
You wanted to hit
can I press print now?
Sure.
Thank you.
No.
Oh, wow. Look at those gorgeous tones. Beautiful contrast, detail and highlights, detail in the blacks there. Just beautiful. So tell us a bit more about the paper so we understand the sophistication of it.
So there's more information on the website and greater specifications, but right here on the label, it'll say 100% cotton fiber. There are different types of paper bases. Resin-coated, many people are familiar with, especially from the analog world, and that's with some type of media that is sandwiched between two resin-coated sheets of polyethylene, I believe it's called. There's alpha cellulose paper, which is made from wood products. But many people that are selling prints are going to be passed down generations. You want to be working with cotton fiber paper because they have the greatest longevity. So it's 100% cotton fiber. The word archival means different things to different people, but it gives you a sense of this is meant for long-term use, long-term viewing. This talks about the finish of the paper. Satin finish in this paper implies that it has a soft gloss to it. It's not a high gloss, but a soft gloss. Mm-hmm. And a smooth surface, we talked about in that paper, do you like texture? This is smooth. Smooth surface, semi-gloss kind of finish. And acid-free, lignin-free, OBA, a lot of all the frees. It's not gluten-free, though. So paper that is acidic will deteriorate over time, and that's the pH. So it's neutral. It's acid-free. Lignin is found in, I believe, in trees and some other products. It's the reason that newspapers, are there any newspapers around anymore? I haven't seen
There's a
one.
few. There's a couple.
Okay, well, for those who remember newspapers, they just kind of leave it on the porch for a couple of weeks and starts to turn yellow.
Right.
It's turning yellow because of lignin. So you want to get all the lignin out of any type of important photographic media. So it's lignin-free. And this is OBA-free, which we talked about earlier. It doesn't have any OBAs that fluoresce that will dissipate over time. And then, of course, we have the paper size. This one is 17 by 22. The thickness of the paper is 17 mils. For some people, they're working in millimeters. And there are certain software programs that are only in millimeters. So you want to make sure you convert.
It makes so much more sense. I mean, have you ever heard of 5/8 of an inch and understand what that means?
Absolutely.
No, 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 no.
But there are some software things. You want to make sure you never confuse mil with millimeter. It's easy to do, especially because I don't have my glasses on.
Right.
Mil is thousandths of an inch, and millimeter is millimeter.
Right.
Which is what? Thousandths of a meter?
I don't know at this
You're
point.
the Aussie guy. Come on, I always forgot. Okay. Now there's another term you may hear called GSM, or grams per square meter. Not to be confused with that candela thing we talked about earlier. That is the weight of the paper. It is not the thickness. So a lot of people, well, I'm using a 300 GSM paper. That doesn't tell you how thick it is. It's kind of like, think in terms of like balsa wood and plywood. It could be the same thickness and one's going to be heavier than the other. And in this case, this is a 25 sheet box. Generally.
Now, I know what that means.
Okay.
There's 25 sheets. I know what that means. There's 25 sheets in the box. Did I get that right?
No, it's 25 sheets to the wind.
I just wanted to sound remotely like I understand this conversation, but I think it's fantastic. I love it. I love the fact that you explained it and made it very easy for us to understand. But ultimately, we're dealing with incredible paper that's going to bring out the best in our print.
And this is a premium price paper, which is why we encourage the use of that colorimeter, that puck, because you don't want to be wasting this paper.
Right.
And by calibrating your system, you're going to minimize waste. Instead of making a print and go, oh, I got to do something else. Oh, it's kind of the way we did it in the darkroom. It used to be called the ring around.
Right.
So do a thing, well, that's a little magenta, and you'd make 10 prints. Which one do I like? You don't want to do that. It's a waste of time. It's certainly a waste of money.
Right. I've just realized that Dano's sort of quoting voice, like when you're quoting another photographer, that's where Rodney Dangerfield comes out.
Oh.
So
who should I be quoting? See if it's...
It's really funny. Just rewind a couple of steps and you'll understand what I'm talking about. So Dano, thank you so much for making this easy, because we could have gone so much deeper. Your depth and breadth of knowledge of color science and the way it works can be quite intimidating. That's your blessing, and that's also your curse to a certain extent. Thank you for dumbing it down for me and the audience watching right now. But you've reignited my passion for printing myself. Certainly I print bigger stuff and everything like that through my favorite lab, Graphy Studio. They're amazing in Italy, but there's times where I need prints in a rush. There's times where I want to gift my clients prints, sometimes even on the same day. And the fact is that we can do our own printing. And certainly when it comes to competition, if you want something very specific, then you can do it yourself. And you've actually made the process really, really, really simple. Thank you so much for your time and your talent, and not going too deep in the color science of it, making it simple for someone like me who, I've been around the industry for a very long time, but I don't really enjoy the science behind it or the algebra behind it. I just like to see the physical touch and print. The romance behind touching and feeling a print is really, really important to me. And I think it's important to know that there is a market for this. There are people that want to touch and feel prints. And if not, we need to re-educate a totally new generation of people that this is where it's at, because it's important. When you're looking at a digital file, I think we wake up and we quickly almost thumb images away and we sort of delete images in our brain thinking that it's disposable. But the idea of being able to hold a print, it sort of gives you pause. Any other final words you want to talk about?
It's really easy, especially for someone like me, to really get into all the technical things and get into some really complicated things. But in the end, there's just something about a print that when you hold it in your hands, it causes people to slow down and look at the photograph rather than swiping through on a screen.
Yeah.
And I've seen this in many different markets, commercial, portrait, wedding, all these different things. One way to really stand out from another person is to display a print.
Right.
Because people then admire your photography versus swiping through it very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Such an easy way to differentiate yourself from your competition. And when it comes to printing for awards, whether it comes to printing for clients, you just got to get in there. I love the fact that you made it simple for us and walk through the process of some very basic things that can start. And we got to print very, very beautifully, very, very quickly. So thanks again. Thank you so much. I strongly encourage you to get reacquainted with the importance and the power and the beauty of printing your own work. So when it comes to printing for competition, when it comes to printing for clients, whether it's gifting someone something, this is where it's at. You'll fall in love with photography again, and that energy will radiate with everything that you do. So have some fun, and we'll see you next time.